Hello, and welcome to the DoneJS contributors meeting. Today is January 13th, 2017, and we've got some of the core team and a couple extra people. Let's go ahead and get started with statuses from the core team. Julian, I know your microphone isn't working, so if you, I don't know if you posted your status in the forum, but I would just do that. We'll go on and go with Justin.
All right. My status was actually kind of hard to totally figure out because GitHub is down right now. And that's always the easiest way, is just like looking at my commits to figure it out. So the big things I remember is we got 3.4 out this week, and I worked on that. I was also working a lot on the Bitcentive application. The upcoming example app. And then last night we did the DoneJS Chicago meetup. For next week, I want to have a rough draft of the Bitcentive guide. And again, just a reminder, Bitcentive guide will really be about how to make DoneJS work with document-based data structures on the document databases, and it'll show how a lot with feathers integration. How to work with feathers. I'm going to be helping make sure can define validate.js gets kind of released, and maybe even a CanJS 3.5 with that. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time setting up QAing systems and monitoring systems for OS tools to make sure that we know when things might break.
We desperately need that, so that'll be great to have in place. Anything else?
Nope. I got a few topics, but that's it for status.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. Kevin.
So this week I've been working on updating the Place My Order app to use DoneJS 1.0 and fixing issues that we find, and also updating the Place My Order guide. And then aside from that, we released a new version of CanStash that has some bug fixes for bracket expressions. And then I did a little bit of work to update the old site, v2.canjs.com, so that all the examples are working again. Those have been broken for a little bit. And then next week, more DoneJS 1.0. Hopefully, everything in Place My Order should be working next week. That's it for me.
Cool. Sounds good. Matthew.
Hey, yeah, I've been kind of like Kevin. I've been working on DoneJS 1.0. I've been working on the chat guide. Got it updated, which might have caused a problem actually. But yeah, so I'm going to work on the actual guide text and make sure all that's updated. Also, we have training tomorrow, Juan and I, in Raleigh, North Carolina. If anyone's listening in Raleigh, North Carolina, look at the meetup for DoneJS Raleigh. Yeah, and we'll be doing that. So I'm also kind of working to make sure all that's in line.
Sweet. Tom, thanks for joining us. Do you have a status for this week and what you'll be working on next week?
Yeah, I've had kind of a strange week here. Switched to a different job, started a new company, and so I haven't been able to really dive into too much stuff, but I need to resolve the URL issue today, and I'm also looking into the build issue today. Because those are like kind of imperative for me. So Matt, if you want to like talk about that later today, I'm gonna try to like work on it for a couple hours, then maybe ping you.
I won't be able to, unfortunately. I'm going to be on an airplane. I'm flying today.
Okay. Is there somebody that I can coordinate with if I were to just like investigate this, put together a fix, and then?
I'm probably the next best person. I'll get the info from Matthew after this about what issue you're working on, and I'll let you know if I'm like prepared, if I'm going to be knowledgeable enough to.
It's a path resolution issue that only happens during bundling.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I worked on a lot of steel, so we'll find out more. But you can always talk to me, and I'll help you the best I can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm probably gonna like dive into working on things for the next like 3 hours, and then if I can get a solution together before then, I'll like reach out to you. Otherwise, like reach out to you in like 3 hours from now.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
I'll be around.
Cool. Anything else?
Nope.
Sweet. All right. And then myself. So this past week, I worked on the SteelJS migration guide and some improvements to it and the README. Added the Steel Stash plugin configuration instructions to the CanJS migration guide. I submitted a work in progress PR for adding CanModel to the legacy section of the CanJS site. I thought it was going to be like a quick, easy win to get that library included, but it wasn't. So I'm not really going to plan on trying to work on that, but the PR is up. Reviewing stuff for Juan and Manuel, and I started working on integrating Google Calendar with the upcoming events section of the DoneJS website. So that's actually up to date with our upcoming events. Hopefully I'll have a PR for that later today. And then next week, along with what I was working on this week, I'll be doing more conference and meetup organizing. And then I'm actually going to be able to get a move on changes to the CanJS site. So some things we've talked about before, improving the homepage and a few other pages. So that's my status. Anything else before we move on to the topics that are in the forum post? I think, Kevin, you said you and Juan are dropping off early. Is there anything that you guys wanted to get in before we move on to the topics?
I don't have anything specific.
I've been working on more can validate stuff, but I don't know if there's anything really worth talking about yet. Probably next week, though.
Okay, sounds good. Anyone have anything before we move on to the topics in the forums? No, all right. Justin, I think you were first to post.
Almost always.
Almost always,
Oh,
yeah.
I wasn't last week, but I made sure I got first this week.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me hit first thing. CanJS 3.4 is out. The big things that it adds. First, it adds feathers, a can connect feathers behavior, where you can pretty much mix in your feathers behavior. In this case, feathers either, I think it's feathers service or feathers session. And the real cool one for me is feathers session, mostly because it makes this kind of, if you create your session type, it makes a session property that is kind of a getter setter. And it works very much like how Bitballs does, where it'll automatically request to know if you've got a session established or not. If you do, session.current will exist, and anything on the session will be available. And then to create a session anywhere, you just have to call new session with the data for your session, probably the user's email and password, call save. And then to log out, you just call anywhere in your app, session current destroy. And the cool thing is because it's all integrated with real time and under the hood, and this observable changes no matter where this code happens. So we're like Bitballs, you kind of have to pass the session object around a lot, which kind of stinks, right? Like your login form has to have the session object. And then if the session property gets deleted or logged out, basically, you have to make sure that session object is removed from everywhere. Now that's gone, you just have this nice global, more or less, that you do session.current. And where generally I hate and despise all forms of globals, sessions are typically one of the few things that it's more or less okay to have a global, because there tends to be just one session for any one given application for the vast majority of apps. So look into that. And even if you're not using Can Connect or feathers and feather session, there's probably some good ideas in there that other people can learn that I'd probably like to talk about in the future, how to make this kind of behavior possible. The next thing that's really awesome in 3.4 is this. There's this new map deep merge module, and if you have a kind of defined map, especially one that's connected to a connection, and it's got nested data, you can now update it, and it will do all of the intelligent things to like do a minimal update that we could possibly figure out for you. So let's say Classroom before this deep merge had like this student was lowercase, was capital I Ilya, but this update came in. It's not going to like replace this whole student with a new student. Instead, it's just going to like see that it's by ID, the same student that was already in the classroom is there, and just update the name property. So it can do a lot of those optimizations to produce minimal changes, which is exactly what you want. And then what we did is we made a behavior called can-connect, can-merge that as long as you weave that into your connection, it will, when your data is, when your instances are updated or your lists are updated, destroyed or created with kind of new data, it's always going to go through this map deep merge. So this, go ahead.
How does it know when two objects are, when an update is for a particular object?
That's a really good, well, I'm not sure if that's a, well, it's
like in the case of the students.
The question that I think you're asking, then I think it's a really good question. But the way it was phrased, I'm not sure if I'm understanding what you mean. But let me answer the question.
It's not a good question. It's a,
well, let me answer what I think is the good question, which is, let me answer that real quick because it's important. And then if I'm not answering your question, then let me know. So I'm thinking your question is like, how does it know how to like uniquely identify that, hey, a student's unique ID property is its ID, so it can properly merge students, or it knows how to merge teacher. Or let's say this is adding a new student. It knows how to hydrate this raw data into a student instance and possibly even get it from the student connection store, like the instance store. Is that your question?
That is exactly my question. Yeah.
Then yes, that's the perfect question to ask. So I wasn't sure that's what you're asking. That's why I was. So the way to do this is you decorate your types. So student, for instance, if you want it to have a different property besides ID is the unique identifier on students, well, you set a student algebra, which it probably has if you're setting up your connection the normal way anyways. It has an algebra which can configure it how to read its ID. And then your student lists, of course, has each item should be a student. And then the final thing is if you want special hydration, like your students can exist in the instance store, then you make sure student has a connection, and it will use the connections hydrate instance method to hydrate students when it's like having to potentially create a new student.
Can we make it so that Connect automatically like sets those up so that the default, like if you use Connect on a map, it has a connection reference and algebra reference?
That's a reasonable. I think that's reasonable as long as they're not there already. Yeah, to add them, which would be most of the time, so you don't have to do this yourself. I think that's fine. If you want to make an issue for that, I'd be good with that. Okay, so that's really exciting if you're using nested data structures. We are starting to finally handle that pretty well. And then the other stuff is, the other thing is if you're using, for people who are migrating from old code, there is a can validate legacy that Juan, who's here, worked on and got the old can validate to work against can maps. So if you've got a lot of code there, you can use that. And then there's just like a few minor bugs, some can define bugs, async setters work, list sort works better now, and some better index operator in Stash. So that is CanJS 3.4. The next thing I want to talk about is the sticky bindings issue that we talked a little.
Is there going to be like a new validation plugin?
Yes.
How does that work with streams? Because I found that in most use cases, you want to have more complex validations so that you could do things like register a user, but keep them provisional until they go through an onboarding process, and then change validation based off of whether or not they're provisional or not, or do contextual validation. So if you're juggling multiple login mechanisms like OAuth and local authentication, it would contextually change your password requirements based off of, are they registered? Are they not registered? They are registered and they have a weak password, maybe it's not valid, but if they aren't registered and they're trying to register with local, then it is required.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Like that.
It's right now they're going to be mostly compute based for I would imagine for the initial release, but I do think I get what you're saying and I can see the importance of it. So I would just say, I would again say, once this initial release is kind of out, create an issue and just start a discussion on how we could best fold in streams. Because streams, we can make them computes now relatively easy because, whether something's valid or not is really kind of a binary thing for the most part. So computes, any stream we could just problems with a instantaneous value. Like something is either valid or not. There is an error or it not. But how whether it's valid or not might be determined through not instantaneous value readings. So you need something like streams to be able to derive whether it's valid or not. Because it's valid as it progresses.
Yeah, essentially there's a timing aspect to it.
Yeah.
Whenever you're using a real world use case.
But I guess what I'm saying is because we have can stream, which can convert a stream to a compute, and because computes are kind of used in can validate, I'm not seeing there's not going to be anything other than just getting the APIs right that I really would see as a issue integrating streams into what we're doing for can validate.
Like one really useful way of doing it would be to have essentially a validation before save and then have a format so that you can basically merge AJAX errors with validation errors and treat them interchangeably, and then have validation based off of like individual fields as they're being updated and not looking ahead and
I'll say that,
throwing errors.
I'll say that what you're saying is going over my head. So what I would recommend you do is write up an issue that can be like thought through and can validate like your use case and give like an example of what you'd want it to look like.
Okay.
Cool. So the sticky bindings, a lot of people, we were discussing this very heavily within Bitovi to catch, so I think most people within Bitovi are pretty familiar, but to catch everybody else up, basically stash bindings are not what I call sticky, and I'll explain what that means. They basically, either side of the binding only gets updated when the other side changes. And if the other side doesn't change, it never updates the other side of the binding. So that can mean, and I kind of walk through an example here. Let's say you had this binding right here, value to first name. And I'm going to type in this input element, Matthew, lowercase. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. The view model has a setter that takes whatever the first name is written as and automatically lowercases it. So I write a lowercase Matthew in the input, and that's going to because the value change is going to update the first name. It's going to call it setter. That's going to be 2 lowercase and come back as Matthew. And the view model there's going to be a change in the view model because it got set to Matthew. Now let's say I type in capital Matthew and then click away. That's going to cause this setter to be set. but there's not actually going to be a value change. So the input is left as capital Matthew, even though the value in the view model is lowercase Matthew. I wanted some time to investigate a little bit more what changing this to a sticky compute would mean. But there are sticky bindings already that happen in certain cases. One of the solutions to this is basically to make it so that whatever the right-hand side is, if the left-hand side changes and sets the right-hand side, it's always going to then reread the value of the right-hand side and try to set itself back. So even if this doesn't change, it's going to always like be sticky with this value and say, well, this is kind of the dominant partner of this binding. So whatever this is always going to like, whatever this ends up is, we're always going to try to set that back to here. So
Hey, Justin, sorry to interrupt. So sticky is when they stay in sync after like the setter changes the value, so the input's value updates to the view model value. That's sticky.
Even if it didn't change. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then the unsticky is the current current behavior where if you change the input's value and the view model changes the value again, the input isn't updated.
Yeah.
Okay.
So actually the biggest question I would say for the group is, well, and I guess we can't really answer this, and I guess I'll just bring it up. I think maybe I'm gonna say this, and then I don't really know if we need a lot of discussion, which is I'm gonna investigate how many tests this might break. And if it doesn't break any tests, well, if it does break tests, to me it's probably a breaking change to add this behavior. If it doesn't break any tests, we're gonna have to decide if this is worth a can-stash bindings 4.0 to make this behavior. I would say let's save our opinions until next week when I know if this is going to break any of our tests.
So, quick idea on this. We already have converters, and we could perhaps use like the type and set capabilities as like a faux converter, and maybe have a syntax to like use that as like an implied converter.
Converters suffer from the same thing, but yeah, I did have like maybe another. I didn't like my solution for a different syntax to kind of set up sticky, but converters themselves run through the same logic because they are two-way bound. So converters don't by themselves wouldn't fix it. You need either sticky or you do need some kind of special syntax to say like, well, I want to set up one of these pairs as the sticky value. So yeah, converters themselves don't fix it, but you're right in that there is a syntax that we could add that fixes it. I think a lot of people are against that. And I would just say like, let's wait until I know how many tests this breaks, and then I think next week we'll talk about this a little more. I don't want to get into it too much.
I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Has this obviously came up from a user issue this week, I think, or a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that's come up a lot over the last couple of years?
I literally, I think can value was sticky. So maybe not because of that. And then also we were working on Bitcentive, and I noticed that this would be a problem. And I was like, man, I really want to look into this. And then like the following Monday or whatever, I saw that issue. So it's like, okay, I kind of independently verified that even prior to this, that this is something that's kind of ugly to work around, which this does have a workaround. Maybe I need to add my JS bin that works around this. You can work around it. It's just, I don't know what the default behavior should be.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, okay. It's not just this person.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was DoneJS Chicago. It went all right. It didn't go, I don't know. I think that we kind of need to decide, well, I guess it was a learning experience for me. And I will not do this kind of meetup again, where I was kind of expecting people to come with their own questions and, on anything. And we would just kind of split up into groups and people would tackle that. Nobody came with their own questions. So I basically quickly turned it into a DoneJS quick start guide kind of walkthrough for everybody. I guess I had a discussion at the end of it, and I was like, how could we do this differently? They're like, well, it's got to be a lot easier than like the DoneJS quick start guide is, or I think because the DoneJS quick start is more about just covering as much ground with an application as possible. If I had to do it again and I wanted to do something like this, I probably would not give people their choice of asking questions. I would probably create a small example app and then have what we talked about is have kind of 3 or 2 different versions of it for depending on how skilled people are. An example was a kind of maybe like a file system, hierarchical file system that you just want to like expand and collapse like the folders and files, and how would you make that work in the client? One simple version could just be the simple version could just be we have it all, like all the data is already there and you just kind of get it on the page and you have stash just kind of like buttons open and close. Another version of it could be, of course, like you're going to build like either the fixtures or there's a service layer already there working for you. You have to figure out how to make a connection to it and that kind of thing. So I guess those were my ideas that I got from doing the meetup. I don't know if other people have ideas on how, like what would be good meetup topics that people would, really find rewarding.
What are some meetup topics that people would find rewarding?
Yeah, or just like what's the one other thing I thought about doing is we have a lot of these kind of meetups all across the US that we do occasionally. One thing I also thought about is just like maybe we should start creating online meetups for across all of our meetups. So instead of like once a year having an event or whatever, it's more frequently than that. And we just like would do a weekend like I would do in Chicago, but instead I'm just going to do the whole thing online.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah. I haven't heard of anything like that before.
I know that what's it called is doing an online conference.
Remote conf.
Yeah,
I think.
So those do exist, and I think we could just get a lot more bang for our buck in some ways. I don't know. It's something, I guess, something to think about how to make these.
Yeah, I think you said. I think like if you, I think you gotta come with like ideas for people. Sometimes a little bit of guidance, So I think definitely having, if you want to break up into groups, is like having different groups working on different types of widgets.
Yeah.
Is a good way to go.
Yeah. For something like this, and I think I'm just gonna. I think I'm gonna start way more simple.
Yeah, it's a shame that like the Hack Night idea sounds good and fun. So it's kind of a shame that people didn't actually bring questions to discuss, and it's hard to have that same spirit of like a Hack Night where you're working on something when it's only like an hour or 2 long meetup.
Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of wanted it because I like the idea of when I give these, it's always it's very one directional. It's like me presenting to everybody. And it'd be nice to like have other people like hear what they're struggling with or whatever. And I don't know, just how to draw out like you kind of want to build a community in these things, right? You want reoccurring people to come back and get a lot of value. I don't know. I'm just going to keep throwing stuff on the wall, I guess, and to see what sticks. So this was, I guess, a chance to throw something on the wall, and it didn't really stick. So I'm done with my status.
With your
topics? My
topics?
topics, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Matthew, I think you were the only other person to post a topic. Do you want to talk about unmaintained projects?
Well, I don't know. I don't really have I don't know if I have a lot to say here. Just kinda, I guess it's similar to what we have with CanJS Legacy, where we kind of, we have projects that for whatever reason we're not really actively working on, which is not to say that they're abandoned or anything, but they're just not like an active focus. I wonder, yeah, there's a couple in Steel in particular. Like there's a JSX one, there's a SAS one, and like no one maintains those. So just kind of wanted to have some ideas of what we should do about those. Like, do we just put like a notice on the GitHub? Part of me doesn't want them to be part of the org at all. If no one's actually maintaining it, is it a good idea to actually have it to be part of the organization, or should we push it off somewhere else? So I don't really have any firm ideas.
I have some opinions. Do you mind if I go, Justin? Thanks. So yeah, and there are projects like that in CanJS where we have like CanRX, which is a repo from super long ago. If we haven't already, like we haven't done this, but I feel like at the top of those readmes, we need to make it really clear, like, this is an unmaintained project. If there's alternatives that people should be looking at to link to those projects, or if it's simply unmaintained, but it could be maintained by someone, like the SAS or JSX for Steel, then actively put out like a, hey, if you use this and you're interested in maintaining this, then contact whoever to talk about taking them up. Those are my opinions. I don't really think those projects should be moved off the org. I don't think there's a huge downside to having them in. Like, it kind of sucks to have the cruft, but that's with every organization. So I don't think it's a real big downside to still have those unmaintained projects. Those are my opinions.
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna say the same thing. The only thing I was gonna add was we should get one of our designers to make like a turtle that's like looking for a home or something as like a big banner image. Like right as you go past the code, you just see that and it's like, this project is looking for a home. If you're interested, like follow this link.
That would be so cute.
Yeah, it would be. So that's the only thing I would add. I think I think that's just what we do, is we just have some big image we can put in, GitHub issues that it's like, hey, we still like this, and like and maybe we kind of have it says like, we'll still accept pull requests that have tests and fixes and things like that, but we're not like actively working very hard on this. And if you want to own it and take it over, like we'll support you in any way that we can. And a cutesy image with it, I think would do well.
So specifically with Steel SAS, I strongly believe that Steel SAS is something that, from a technological perspective, Steel will never be able to do adequately. And what I recognize is the only option for doing Steel and doing SAS and doing it properly is to use the C node SAS bindings and do it server side, and then do something like a config remapping. And that's just because with SAS in particular, it basically needs to traverse through all the different types of like naming conventions, and you need something like Broccoli Eyeglass or Eyeglass to like resolve npm dependencies for SAS, so that you can utilize things like Bourbon. And what we could do to address SAS is essentially put together a guide of like, hey, here you can take this 5-line Broccoli script, build your SAS independently, use something like your like Steel config to remap all those paths, and then suddenly it's a non-issue because you can utilize SAS.
Would you still have modulates? I guess that's a key thing we want to make sure that it's still possible.
Yeah. The way that I've been managing that is to essentially have everything depend on CSS, and then rebuild everything to my CSS folder and do like a wildcard like paths so that it's just transparent. That's like the really like easy mode way of doing this. I haven't really figured out like a better solution for, you know, if I wanted to like require import the like Sass, but then have it actually turn into CSS, because if you just do that kind of remapping, at least when last time I tried it, like it was trying to load in the Sass plugin anyway, and I couldn't get it to like override that. But maybe that's something that I can revisit, or we can revisit. But Sass is really important, and it's if we can get a Sass solution that can utilize Eyeglass off the shelf, so that we can start having, you know, you can import Bourbon or whatever. That is a really big usability issue, and yeah, I don't think it's ever something that can be done directly in Steel. So if we essentially point people towards like a way to do it that merges together, it would be like a good middle ground. Because now we're not maintaining this other thing, and we're giving people what they need.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely like some documentation or even just a blog post to explain how to use that kind of setup and Steel would be very valuable.
So if somebody wants to like I have a solution in mind that I've been using, and if you want to go over it and like maybe we could bounce around ideas to make it more I don't know, suitable, but it's like a really simple solution.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and that would probably be it'd probably be good to file an issue under Steel Sass to kind of put your notes, and then we can, if you want to go through that with someone in particular, or just bring it up as a topic at another contributors meeting, we could have a good discussion around it.
Yeah.
Cool. And Matthew, kind of related to, because you brought up the Seal JSX, actually, there's a few projects like Steel JSX, and then some of the example projects, like using Steel with React or Angular 2 or what have you, that haven't been updated for Steel 1. And those are all things that I would like to do to be able to have that like sample code available for people to use, and that kind of falls under my umbrella of wanting to you know, promote like Steel being used with other projects and making it really easy for people to do
I don't
that.
think he's worried about you stepping on his toes if you want to take that on, Jason.
Oh, I know. Yeah, sorry, that's not what I meant to say, but I just wanted to bring up that like those things are on my radar. So some of those like unmaintained projects, like hopefully we'll get to like making them semi-maintained sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of where I'm kind of like fuzzy, because like you're not stepping on my toes. That's not my project. I've never done anything with that project, so anyone can do anything with it. So I don't want to have ownership over it.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Cool. Does anyone else have anything related to this topic? Nope. Okay. Are there any other topics, or does anyone else have any other topics that they want to bring up? Nope. Okay. It'll be a relatively short contributors meeting then. Thank you guys for joining. Anyone watching the live stream, thanks for watching, and see you guys next week.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
See you.